The alert came in at 2:15 p.m. local time, and by 2:19, the entire southern coast of Alaska was under a tsunami warning. The screens inside the National Tsunami Warning Center in Palmer flashed red. Analysts stood up. Nobody spoke for the first 10 seconds. 60 miles southeast of Kodiak Island, the seafloor had just moved. The quake registered a magnitude 7.2, a major earthquake capable of leveling buildings if it strikes close to people. The depth was only 13 miles below the ocean floor, shallow enough to send violent shaking straight into coastal towns. Within minutes, 4,200 felt reports poured in from across the state. The strongest aftershock so far measured 5.4, a quake that on any normal day would make headlines by itself. This is not a distant, deep quake. This is not a slow slip event. Something significant is happening along the Aleutian megathrust, and the warning system just showed the world why it exists. Today, we are going to break down exactly why the warning went out in 4 minutes, why it was lifted 30 minutes later, and what the seafloor sensors and tide gauges are telling scientists about the next 48 hours. No speculation. No overblown disaster language. Just the actual numbers, the science that drove the alert, and the real human stakes for the coastal communities still under an advisory tonight. Have you ever felt a big quake and then heard a tsunami siren start seconds later? If you live in coastal Alaska, Oregon, Washington, or Northern California, that memory is real for someone in your family. Tell us in the comments what those first minutes felt like and what you did. If you want the truth about every major event on the Ring of Fire before the cable networks catch up, subscribe now. We track every significant earthquake in real time and break down the alerts that mainstream news rushes past in a single sentence. At 2:15 p.m. Alaska Daylight Time, deep under the Gulf of Alaska, the Pacific Plate slipped beneath the North American Plate. The rupture began 13 miles below the seafloor. That is shallow. In earthquake terms, shallow means violent. A shallow quake sends its energy straight up through rock and water without losing much strength on the way. The shaking that reached Kodiak was not a rolling motion. It was a hard, vertical jolt, followed by 30 to 40 seconds of sustained ground movement. The epicenter is the point on the surface directly above where the rupture started. In this case, that point sat 60 miles southeast of the city of Kodiak, in open ocean. 60 miles sounds far. It is not. Seismic waves travel through solid rock at roughly 3 miles per second. The first shaking reached Kodiak in under 20 seconds. Residents had no time to think. They only had time to react. A magnitude 7.2 is not a small number. Magnitude measures the total energy released by a quake, and the scale is not linear. Every whole number up is about 32 times more energy. A 7.2 releases the energy of roughly 32 Hiroshima-sized atomic bombs, all concentrated along a fault line under the sea. That energy has to go somewhere. It went into the seafloor, into the rock above it, and into the buildings on Kodiak Island. The felt intensity near the epicenter reached V6 to 7th on the modified Mercalli scale. Level 6 means people cannot stand steady, dishes crash to the floor, and pictures fall off walls. Level 7 just means older buildings crack, chimneys break, and drivers pull over because they cannot steer. In Kodiak, both happened at once. Cars on Rezanoff Drive rolled to the shoulder. Windows shattered in older wood frame homes near the harbor. A section of ceiling tile came down inside the Kodiak High School gym, empty at the time because school had ended 2 hours earlier. Within the first hour, the United States Geological Survey received 4,200 Did You Feel It reports. That is the citizen science system where anyone who felt the quake can log the intensity where they stood. The reports came from Kodiak, from Homer, from Seward, from Anchorage, nearly 250 miles away, and even from Fairbanks in the interior. Fairbanks is 600 miles from the epicenter. People there felt the ground move. The aftershock sequence began almost immediately. Within 2 hours, 18 aftershocks over magnitude 3.0 shook the region. Most were small, a few were not. The largest so far, a magnitude 5.4, hit 34 minutes after the main shock. A 5.4 by itself is a serious quake. On any other day, in any other place, it would be the story. Here, it was a footnote. Kodiak itself is a city of 5,900 people. It sits on Kodiak Island, the second largest island in the United States, connected to the mainland by nothing but ferry and airplane. The community is built around fishing. The harbor is full of boats. The Coast Guard base at the edge of town is the largest in the country. When the shaking started, deckhands on the docks grabbed rails. Vessel captains looked at the water. Coast Guard aviators on the runway checked the tarmac for cracks. The shaking lasted about 40 seconds. In an earthquake, 40 seconds is a long time. Most quakes shake for 10 to 20 seconds and stop. When shaking goes past 30 seconds, seismologists know the rupture length was long, which means the magnitude is high, which means the potential for tsunami generation is real. That was the first alarm. But the shaking was only the beginning. Beneath the surface of the Gulf of Alaska, the seafloor had just pushed upward, and that set the second, more terrifying system into motion. Inside the National Tsunami Warning Center in Palmer, Alaska, alarms triggered the moment the first P waves reached the nearest seismic stations. P waves are the fastest seismic waves, the pressure pulse that arrives before the destructive shaking. Automated software calculated a preliminary magnitude within 90 seconds. Analysts saw a shallow thrust event with vertical slip. That is the exact combination that generates tsunamis. At minute 4 after the earthquake, the warning went out. 4 minutes. For a life or death decision, that is astonishing speed. The scientists at Palmer did not wait for tide gauge confirmation. They could not. In coastal Alaska, the tsunami travel time from an offshore quake to the nearest shoreline can be under 15 minutes. Waiting for confirmation means waiting too long. A tsunami warning is the highest level of alert. It means a destructive wave is expected, and you must move to high ground or inland immediately. There's no middle option. There is no wait and see. When the sirens sound, you go. The warning issued today covered 320 miles of coastline. That is the distance from Hinchinbrook Entrance in the east all the way to Unimak Pass in the west. Along that stretch sit dozens of small villages, several fishing ports, and one Coast Guard base. The population under the warning totaled about 17,000 people. That is the combined census of every community inside the alert zone. The city of Kodiak with 5,900 residents, Sandpoint with 950, King Cove with 800, Chignik with 90, Old Harbor, Larsen Bay, Akiak, Karluk. Villages of a few hundred people scattered along a shoreline the size of the entire California coast. 17,000 men, women, children, and elders, all told to move to higher ground within minutes. 3 warning centers activated at once. The National Tsunami Warning Center in Palmer coordinated the Alaska response. The Pacific Tsunami Warning Center in Iwa Beach, Hawaii, watched the wider ocean basin in case the wave reached Hawaii or the west coast. The Alaska State Emergency Operations Center in Anchorage began contacting local officials, the National Guard, and the state troopers. All 3 centers were online within 6 minutes of the earthquake. On the ground, the response was fast. Kodiak has practiced this. The community runs tsunami drills every year. Schools have marked evacuation routes painted on the pavement. Blue signs point uphill. Every child in Kodiak knows the phrase, get to high ground. Within 12 minutes of the sirens, the Kodiak High School shelter began receiving families. The Coast Guard base moved aircraft to higher ground and pushed helicopters into the air to check on remote villages. Providence Kodiak Island Medical Center activated its emergency plan. Patients who could be moved were shifted to upper floors. At the harbor, dozens of fishing boats fired up engines. In tsunami response, boats that can leave port head for deep water. A tsunami wave in the open ocean is only a few feet high and passes harmlessly beneath a vessel. In shallow water near a harbor, that same wave becomes a wall. Getting boats out to sea is often safer than tying them down. Within 20 minutes, the outer harbor emptied. In Sandpoint, a village of 950 people on Popoff Island, the tsunami siren woke residents from afternoon rest. In King Cove, 800 people climbed the hill behind the cannery. In Chignik, all 90 residents gathered at the community center on high ground. These are not big cities. These are places where everyone knows everyone. A tsunami warning in a village of 90 is personal. You're not evacuating a stranger. You're checking on your neighbor's grandmother. The reason the warning was issued so aggressively came down to 3 factors. First, the depth. At 13 miles, the rupture was shallow enough to deform the seafloor. Second, the location. The Aleutian megathrust is one of the most tsunami-productive faults in the world. A subduction zone is a place where one tectonic plate dives beneath another. Here, the Pacific plate slides under the North American plate at about 2.5 inches per year. When that motion sticks and then snaps, entire sections of seafloor can jump upward by several feet in seconds. That vertical motion is what makes a tsunami. Third, the models. Within 2 minutes of the quake, forecasting software ran a preliminary tsunami simulation using the estimated fault geometry. The model showed potential wave heights of several feet reaching the coast within 20 to 30 minutes. Several feet in a village harbor is not a photo opportunity. It is a life-taking flood. With sirens wailing and thousands on the move, the clock was running. But the answer to whether a wall of water was racing toward the coast lay not on land, but in the black depths of the Pacific. The DART boys were listening. DART stands for Deep Ocean Assessment and Reporting of Tsunamis. Each unit is a pair of instruments. On the seafloor sits a pressure sensor. Above it, floating on the surface, sits a yellow buoy the size of a small car. The seafloor sensor measures the weight of the water column above it. When a tsunami passes overhead, even a small one, the water column deepens slightly, and the sensor feels the pressure change. It sends the reading up through the water by acoustic pulse to the surface buoy, which radios it by satellite to the warning centers. There are 32 DART buoys deployed by the United States around the Pacific and Atlantic. Several sit in the Gulf of Alaska. When the quake struck today, the nearest DART buoy began transmitting 1-minute updates instead of its usual hourly report. That is called event mode. It means the sensor detected something worth watching in real time. The first useful data arrived at Palmer about 18 minutes after the earthquake. Analysts saw a pressure signature, but it was small, very small. The wave passing over the Dart buoy measured only a few centimeters of amplitude in open ocean. In deep water, that is normal. Tsunamis are long, low waves in the ocean and only build up when they hit shallow coast. The question was whether that small open ocean signal would grow into something dangerous near shore. The answer came from the Kodiak tide gauge. Tide gauges sit at harbors and measure sea level second by second. The Kodiak gauge recorded a peak wave height of just 0.4 feet, about 12 centimeters, roughly the length of a pencil. That is a ripple. That is nothing. A small dog waiting at the shoreline would not have noticed it. Similar minor readings came in from Sandpoint and from the Aleutian gauge at Adak. 30 minutes after the warning was issued, the National Tsunami Warning Center downgraded the alert. The warning was lifted. In its place, an advisory took effect. A tsunami advisory is not the all-clear. It means the main threat of a destructive wave has passed, but strong currents and unexpected surges are still possible in bays and harbors. People can leave high ground, but they must stay off beaches, away from marinas, and out of the water. Why did a magnitude 7.2 quake produce almost no tsunami? 3 reasons, and scientists have been reconstructing them for the last few hours. First, the slip was not purely vertical. Post-event analysis of the fault mechanism suggests a significant strike slip component. Strike slip means the two sides of the fault moved horizontally past each other, rather than one side thrusting up over the other. Horizontal motion does not lift much water. Vertical motion does. The more horizontal the slip, the smaller the tsunami. Second, the rupture area was smaller than a great earthquake. A magnitude 7.2 has a fault rupture length of roughly 50 to 60 miles. A magnitude 9 has a rupture length of 600 miles or more. To generate a devastating trans-Pacific tsunami, you need to lift a huge area of seafloor by many feet. Today's quake lifted a smaller area by less. Third, local bathymetry. Bathymetry is the shape of the sea bottom. The waters near Kodiak have complex ridges and canyons that can absorb or redirect wave energy. In this case, the geography worked in the region's favor. In other places, in other events, it has not. At 2:45 p.m., the advisory was in place. Sirens went quiet. Families still on high ground began to hear the news on their radios and phones. Some cheered. Many did not. They stood in the cold and looked out at the ocean, waiting to be sure. In Kodiak, in King Cove, and Sandpoint, people did not rush back down. They waited. They had been through this before. In Alaska, you do not trust the ocean easily. By 2:45 p.m., the immediate danger of a massive tsunami had passed. But the event wasn't over. In fact, scientists were now turning their attention to a threat that could linger for days, and it was coming from the same fracture in the Earth's crust. The aftershock sequence is the ongoing story. An aftershock is a smaller earthquake that follows the main shock along the same fault system, as the crust adjusts to the new stress. Aftershocks decay over time, but they do not stop for weeks. Some can be nearly as large as the main event. In rare cases, what looks like a main shock turns out to be a foreshock, and the real earthquake follows. Within 2 hours of the main quake, seismologists at the Alaska Earthquake Center in Fairbanks logged 18 aftershocks over magnitude 3.0. The strongest, a 5.4, hit 34 minutes in and shook Kodiak again. A magnitude 5.4 near a population center can crack chimneys, damage older buildings, and trigger landslides on unstable slopes. Right now, the United States Geological Survey estimates a meaningful probability of another magnitude 6 or larger aftershock in the coming week. That is not a prediction. That is a statistical forecast based on decades of data on how aftershock sequences behave. The Aleutian megathrust has done far worse than a 7.2. On March 27, 1964, the same subduction zone produced the magnitude 9.2 Great Alaska Earthquake. That quake was the second largest ever recorded on Earth. It ripped for 4.5 minutes. Downtown Anchorage collapsed in on itself as the ground liquefied. A 30-foot tsunami crashed through Kodiak's harbor and swept away most of the downtown waterfront. 18 people died in Kodiak alone. More than 120 died in total across Alaska, Oregon, and California. Entire villages were rebuilt on higher ground because the old sites simply no longer existed. The 1964 quake is the reason the modern tsunami warning system exists. Before 1964, the United States had no coordinated tsunami response. There was no Palmer Center. There were no dart buoys. There were no evacuation drills painted on Kodiak pavement. The National Tsunami Warning Center was created because in 1964, nobody knew the wave was coming. Today, everyone knew within 4 minutes. Compare today's event to the 1999 magnitude 7.0 quake south of Kodiak. That one was deeper, about 20 miles down, and involved mostly horizontal slip. No tsunami warning was issued, no wave came. Today's 7.2 was shallower and had enough vertical motion to force the alert. The difference between issuing a warning and not issuing one comes down to depth, mechanism, and location. Scientists made the right call in both cases. There's another concern that has kept researchers watching the region tonight: submarine landslides. The continental slope off the Alaska coast is steep, and it is layered with loose sediment built up over thousands of years. A moderate aftershock in the wrong spot could knock loose a huge underwater section of that slope. When a submarine landslide happens, it can generate a local tsunami all by itself, even without a large earthquake. That kind of wave is faster, more localized, and harder to warn against. It gives coastal communities minutes, not hours. For that reason, the advisory remains in effect tonight along parts of the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island. Officials are asking residents to stay away from beaches, marinas, and low-lying harbor areas. Watch for sudden changes in the water level. If the tide goes out fast and far without explanation, do not go looking. Turn around and climb. The Alaska National Guard is on standby with C-130 transport aircraft and Black Hawk helicopters, ready to airlift supplies or evacuate residents from villages if damage assessments require it. So far, no serious injuries have been reported. Structural damage in Kodiak is being evaluated block by block. A cannery in Sandpoint reported cracked concrete floors. A schoolhouse in King Cove reported broken windows. No deaths, no missing persons. What happened today off Kodiak Island was not a false alarm. It was a live fire test of a system built on tragedy, and it passed. But the forces that triggered it are still building pressure deep underground, and they will strike again. Put today next to March 27th, 1964. On that Good Friday, a magnitude 9.2 quake struck the same coast. 30-foot waves flattened downtown Kodiak. 18 people died in that city alone. Nobody saw it coming. There was no warning, there was no siren, there was only the water. Today, the quake was smaller, the wave was smaller, but the real difference is not in the numbers on the tide gauge. The real difference is the 4 minutes. In 1964, the first warning that a tsunami was coming was the tsunami itself. Today, 17,000 people knew before the first ripple reached shore. 4 minutes of science stood between a coast and a disaster. The difference is preparation, not luck. Every sensor in the water, every algorithm at Palmer, every blue evacuation sign painted on a Kodiak sidewalk exists because of what happened in 1964. That system is the legacy of people who died before anyone could warn them. What saved lives today was not chance. It was the refusal to forget. Somewhere along the Aleutian Trench tonight, the pressure is still building. The plates are still moving 2.5 inches a year. The next rupture is not a question of if, it is a question of when. And when it comes, the same 4-minute clock will start ticking again. If you live on a coast, tell us in the comments what your plan is when the sirens sound. Do you have a route? Do you have a bag ready? Do the people you live with know where to meet you? The small details are the ones most people never think about until the ground starts shaking. Share yours. Somebody reading may need to hear it. Subscribe to the Active Bureau because we track every significant earthquake on the Ring of Fire and every major event in the Atlantic Basin, and we break down the science before mainstream news moves on. And share this video with one person you love who lives near the coast, because the next warning may not end in a ripple.